So obviously the Texans took CJ Stroud with the second overall pick in this year's draft after the Panthers took Bryce Young first overall. I would imagine Bryce Young is going to play right away. But from the sound of things, the Carolina Panthers have no timeline on when they are going to put Young on the field.
We don't have a timeline. We're not saying, hey, this guy's going to start the first game or we're not going to play him at all this year. When the time is right, where we felt like he's got enough in the mastery of the offense, where he can go out and operate this and be successful, that's when he'll be out there. We went out and signed Andy Dalton for a reason. He played as a rookie. He's got a lot of experience. He understands his role. And, we can play good football. If Andy's the guy to start the season, and he's the starter right now heading into the season, then he'll be the guy. When Bryce is ready or Matt Corral is ready, whoever it may be, that'll be the time they go in. We say it's open competition, but Frank did say, hey, Andy's our guy right now. He'll walk into the season as a starter, and then as the young guys compete underneath him, then they'll go in when they're ready.
Dalton was randomly good last year. If you take a look at the quarterback rating numbers, it was, I want to say, top 12. It was pretty good. Not saying that makes Andy Dalton a good quarterback, but as far as veterans go, you could do worse. I suppose Case Keenum would be one of those could do worse, but not by much. And I do wonder about what the Texans might do to open things up. If you go back to 2017, when the Texans drafted Deshaun Watson, you'll famously remember Bill O'Brien saying, we're going with Tom Savage to open things up. I think that was largely due to the fact that the Texans thought that they had the worst offensive line in the league going into that year. They wanted to minimize the damage that Watson would get. And the problem was, I think Savage got sacked like 6 times in the first half against the Jaguars, and then they brought in Watson for the second half. And it wasn't a lot better, but they felt that a mobile quarterback was the only way that they could compete on a weekly basis. And Watson's mobility, even with the torn ACL that he had suffered before then, and then, of course, suffered a little bit later, it was still pretty good. He had that, 40-yard touchdown run, I think, against the Cincinnati Bengals in his second game in the league, his first actual start. It was a Thursday night game. So I think when we look at what the Texans will do with C.J. Stroud, they clearly have tried in the past to not put the early pick out there right away, probably for fear that the same thing would happen to him that happened to David Carr, the first overall pick of this franchise. But I'm of the belief that you put the guy in right away. I mean, I know some people will point to Kansas City as the model example, where Alex Smith was still the starter after they drafted Patrick Mahomes in the middle of the first round, and Mahomes comes in the next year and he's awesome. But wouldn't Mahomes have been awesome right away, probably? I mean, based off of what we've seen from him thus far, do we really think he would have been that much worse than Alex Smith right out of the chute? He might have thrown a lot of interceptions, and maybe the Chiefs wouldn't have made the playoffs the way that they did that year, but if I'm not mistaken, they lost on Marcus bleeping Mariota in the first round of the playoffs that year.
Yeah, and as far as long term, if Pat Mahomes was going to be this good, I feel like he would have been that good after, like you said, maybe turn the ball over a little too much, having to learn on the fly in what would that have been, 2017.
Yeah.
I think he would have figured it out. I don't think that if the Chiefs would have played him week 1, 2017, that now would be talking about Pat Mahomes. Remember that guy? Well, why'd we ever think it would work because of that guy? I feel like when you're that level of good, it works itself out.
You could make the same argument for Aaron Rodgers, which some people would make the claim, hey, if Aaron Rodgers is in there too early and not learning behind Brett Favre, where would he be? First off, Brett Favre is not teaching anybody anything. Brett Favre is not going to be a good teammate to the guy holding his clipboard. And Brett Favre is also a guy who seemed to operate mainly based off of instincts. Remember, that Packers team, before they moved on from Brett Favre in that offseason, because Favre was waffling as much as he was, they made it to the NFC Championship game against the New York Giants, but Brett Favre threw an interception in overtime and set the Giants up for the game-winning field goal. It was snowing in that game. You think Rodgers wouldn't have put the Packers in that same spot? I bet they would have gotten there with Rodgers too. This idea that you got to let the guy wait, I just don't think it's correct. And I guess the only reservation that you might have would be if you were where the Texans were back in 2017, where they thought that they had the worst offensive line in the league. That might be a reason to not put Stroud in. But I don't think the Texans are going to feel that way. Yeah, you want to get more out of Kenyon Green than you got last year, but you might have the best left tackle in the NFL in Laramie Tunsil. Your right tackle's no slouch in Titus Howard. You just traded for Shaq Mason. You just drafted Juice Scruggs. You got to feel reasonably good about your offensive line. The wide receivers aren't great, but at the very least, a lot of them have played in the NFL before. Stroud's got to go right in. And I think the Panthers are going to put Bryce Young right in, too. They say this now. Andy Dalton's the starter. It gives them a spot where they feel like they're not putting any pressure on Bryce Young. What will be, will be. But put the young guy in right away. I hope that's what the Texans end up doing with C.J. Stroud. And I don't think it's going to be Davis Mills. I think it would be Case Keenum if they were to open the year with a veteran. I don't know if Davis Mills is going to be – he's still on the team technically.
Yeah.
He's still there.
Before the draft, they mentioned they had one or before free agency, they mentioned they had one quarterback on the roster. And they didn't say his name, but they're talking about Davis Mills.
I thought they were talking about E.J. Perry. I think they've mentioned Case Keenum and E.J. Perry, and they haven't mentioned Davis Mills by name.
Yeah, no, I think that's also a good point about like worrying about someone getting David Carr. That's like now at this point so much of a trope of like, oh, don't want to get David Carr. Don't like, did Josh Allen get David Carr? Like they built around, they put him out there. He learned on the fly. They got a better offensive line. They got a better wide receiver with Stephon Diggs, and then he turned into a good quarterback. Like he didn't get ruined because he had to throw passes to fullbacks and tight ends.
The rules are very favorable for quarterbacks now too, Sean.
Yeah, they don't get demolished like they did in 2002.
You could make the argument that Bryce Young got hit harder at Alabama than he'll ever get hit in the NFL. If you've watched some of the replays of times he's gotten absolutely just bundled, like they are actually still in college not as protective as quarterbacks as they probably should be. Like they should be a little bit better. No. If you're gonna go consistent with the NFL, you're right, and I'm glad you said the no.
They shouldn't. But yes, if they were to be consistent with the NFL cares about the quarterback's safety more than college football does.
Right, like the 1%ers. You know, it's like
yeah,
it's like the government and the 1%.
They're like Matt Ishbia. They play by different rules.